You are listening to War of the Stars, a Star Wars podcast presented by Realm of the Mist Entertainment with your host, John Tolly.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to War of the Stars, a Star Wars podcast, coming to you tonight, as always, from deep within the Outer Rim, far beyond the watchful eyes of the Galactic Empire, or in this case, should I say, far beyond the watchful eyes of the Galactic Republic. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what is called foreshadowing.
Bum, bum, bum.
My name, of course, is John Mark Tolley, and joining me, as always, Mr. Ray Rumsey. Ray, how are you?
How you doing, guys?
Oh, so how have you been in the past 2 weeks? We skipped last week, but we are back again. So, how have things been with you?
Oh, busy. I'm sure everybody can relate to that. But I'm definitely very excited to get the show going. We kind of somewhat figured out our audio issues we were having, so hopefully this doesn't sound too terrible. And if not, just pretend I'm a droid, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a excitement where I'm at in my real world, but I work for a large retail chain, and we recently had a bomb scare where I work at. Fortunately, it was a hoax, and fortunately, the rebel scum have been apprehended, and the Imperial forces have dealt with them accordingly.
Good. That's definitely good news.
But yeah, it was just kind of, especially with everything else going on here in the state. We live in, of course, the U.S. and the States, and with everything going on here, it's always kind of scary when you hear that stuff and you hear that you're evacuating the store and you're not sure what's going on, and yeah, it's
right.
a little nerve-wracking, but
yeah, I couldn't imagine being in that situation. That's got to be pretty intense.
Oh yeah, it was. Anyway, but we're not here to talk about all of that. We're here to talk about Star Wars, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So, as we alluded to our last episode, we're going to be starting a series on the Clone Wars. Now, the Clone Wars were first mentioned all the way back in Episode 4, A New Hope. In what was almost just a throwaway line, a couple of throwaway lines.
Yeah.
Obi-Wan first mentions that he and Luke's father were in the Clone Wars, and of course Luke mentions you were in the Clone Wars, and of course we get Leia saying that Obi-Wan helped her father during the Clone Wars. But other than that, that was really the only mention of the Clone Wars in the original trilogy, and for years all we had was speculation. As fans, all we had was maybe a few mentions in some of the novels of clones and stuff like that, but no one really knew, was the war against clones, were the clones, who were the clones, who were fighting against the clones? No one really knew. So it wasn't until, of course, we get the prequel trilogies that we really find out what the Clone Wars were all about, and what led up to the Clone Wars, and the culmination of everything. And I'm not sure exactly what age group you're in, Ray, but I grew up with the original trilogy being the Star Wars movies that I first saw. I grew up pre-prequel. So I was a young adult. I was in my 20s, mid-20s, when Episode 1 came out. So I'm not.
Yeah, when was Episode 1? When did that come out? It was
99. 99.
Yeah, 99. At that point, I was not quite in my 20s yet. I was in my teens. I'm bad at math.
Okay.
I've said that before.
Yeah.
But
hey, so yeah.
yeah, so I mean, I remember when I was a kid being able to see the originals, the 4, 5 and 6, and they were still, I don't want to say new, but they were still fresh.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, I was a bit older when the pre-prequels came out, or as you put it, and, you know, episode 1, 2, and 3, and I remember going to the theater, and it was, I was making it a point to go to the theater to see these ones, because I didn't get that opportunity when 4, 5, and 6 came out. So, you know, myself and a bunch of friends, I mean, we had this whole thing. We all got together at one of the guys' houses, and we had our little retractable light-up lightsabers, and we were outside practicing, like, these choreographed lightsaber fights. We had cloaks, and we were fully prepared to go to our local mall in full-on LARP Jedi gear in celebration of this movie. And I remember getting there, and there was probably 6 or 7 of us, and we all sat next to each other, and that initial, you know, scroll happened, the screen crawl that everybody loves, and, you know, the cheers, and everybody went crazy. And it went on. We read through it. We went through the movie. And all I can remember is there was a pretty even divide between my friends, and that half of us couldn't comprehend the atrocity we had just seen. And the other half was just in love with it and couldn't wait for episode 2, and they were throwing out fan theories, and like they were just on it. And so I was one of the ones that I initially I could not grasp it. But as time has progressed, I've watched it numerous other times, and I've picked it apart and, you know, analyzed it from different angles and stuff. There are some things in there that I just are not my cup of tea. However, I know why they put them in there. It was a very businessy standpoint, a very Hollywood standpoint. But overall, when you take all 3 movies into assumption and put them all together, they really do tell a fantastic story leading up to the Clone Wars.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. Yeah, and like leading even episode 2, which I think even the most diehard Star Wars fan will have to admit that episode 2 is probably, of all 6 of the original movies, the first 6, episode 2 is probably definitely the weakest.
Yeah,
I mean, and we did a whole podcast earlier, a while back, on picking out the good points of episode 2, which is not easy to do, let me tell you. But it's part of that story, and you can't have episode 3, which I think is definitely the best of the prequel trilogies, without having episode 1 and 2 before it. You have to have those 2, you know, leading up to, you know. But I want to talk a little bit now about the Clone Wars as they were seen, going in universe now for a while. Okay. How Luke and Leia would have viewed the Clone Wars. because I think you get kind of a sense of, in just the few little words that are mentioned, how they would have viewed them. And I think we can make one assumption with Luke. Luke had an education, and you get that from the line where he talks about wanting to go to the academy, about putting in his application and getting accepted, which meant usually if you're accepted to an academy, that means you have some sort of prior education. So he probably had some sort of, hollow classes that he went to get in a basic schooling education. We know probably that Leia did. Leia was probably taught like the greatest courses by the greatest teachers and tutors on
Right.
Alderaan.
Yeah, spared no expense.
Yes, of course, spared no expense. But Luke too. But I think Luke's view of the Clone Wars was probably very skewed.
Right.
He probably had a very imperialistic view, and any mention at all of the Jedi, if there was any, would have been very negative, if they were even mentioned at all.
Yeah, I mean,
it would be interesting to go. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking, given how, he says, oh, the only person I know is old Ben. So he obviously knows of, at the very least, of Obi-Wan. But,
yeah,
he always just kind of, from the impression I got, is he always kind of chalked him up as this desert hermit that was just kind of this weirdo. I feel like if he knew that he was a Jedi and he could do these kinds of things with the Force, he might have viewed him with, a little more reverence, or how somebody might view, like, if you had met, I don't know, Merlin or something, some kind of wizard.
Well, and you can see also the sort of romanticism that had probably come about of the Clone Wars. This kind of idea of, whoa, that's cool. When he finds out, he said when Obi-Wan's mentioned, being in the Clone Wars, Luke's first response is, "You fought in the Clone Wars? Like, whoa, that's so cool."
Right.
And whereas Leia's was more because Leia grew up with someone who she knew had been involved in the war, and had probably grown up hearing stories of what had happened and stories of the Jedi. So she had a much more reverence and much more, she knew what the people who fought and the people who lived through the Clone Wars had lived through.
Right.
So her view of the Clone Wars was much more nuanced and much more, like, it's almost the difference of, if you had a father who just, you just happen to meet someone, you didn't have a father who fought in a war, who fought in Vietnam or fought in, whatever war it would be.
Mm-hmm.
And then compared to someone who did, it's a lot more, you understand a lot more what happened during that time period compared to just someone who reads it in a history book.
True. Given what Leia was trying to do with, the rebellion and things like that, and obviously in the first three movies we see who she's going to, and they were powerful politicians and things of that nature. So I kind of almost have to wonder if she was very against the Clone Wars. Maybe she felt that they were, one of those things in history that, were just an atrocity that should never have happened, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and you could almost make the analogy of the Clone Wars of being analogous to the First World War, where and you can look back in history, and I would love to have Dr. Liddell on here again sometime, our resident historian, who's been on the show before, to kind of talk about that analogy of the First World War comparing the Clone Wars to the First World War and the Galactic Civil War to the Second World War. And one of the things with the First World War is when you look at it, the causes of it, it was one of those wars that was inevitable, but it didn't need to happen. There was no point to the war. And you can say the same thing for the Clone Wars. There was no point to the Clone Wars.
Right. I mean,
it was just senseless, and we'll get into the cause. We can get into the causes of what led up to the Battle of Geonosis in episode 2 here in a bit. But yeah, I mean, when you look back at it, and I think a lot of people probably did, in universe would have looked back at it and think, what was that all about?
Right. Yeah, I
think. Oh, go ahead.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
I said, and I mean, in the long run, all it was is a power play by Palpatine.
Right.
Which we can get into that and how that had to be one of the most convoluted plans to get to power in the history of the universe.
Right.
I'm going to start war.
You may hate the guy, and he may be designed to be the ultimate villain, if you will. But man, that guy had patience.
Oh, well, and the thing is everything had to go exactly right. If one thing messed up, if even the slightest thing, like, and I know I've seen different, little cartoons people did where they do what ifs, like if at the beginning of episode 3 when Anakin kills Dooku, if Dooku had have outed Palpatine at that point and said, he's the Sith Lord, he's the master behind everything, that would have been, ended it all. At any point during that time, if one thing goes wrong.
But see, then, I kind of think that at that moment anyway, because everything leading up to that, like, Palpatine was all entwined with Anakin. Like,
yes.
Palpatine knew exactly where he wanted Anakin to be and go and all that. So he kind of presented himself as almost a father figure, I feel.
Yeah.
So I think even if Dooku had have outed him, he might have said, no, that can't be true. Although the irony of it, if Dooku had have said that and Anakin responded with Luke's no from episode 5, that would have been hilarious. But I see why they wouldn't do that.
Yeah, definitely.
But he was a very scheming and manipulative person. And obviously, like you said, everything had to go exactly as planned. But he never really... And I get it. It's... All right, guys, I hear you yelling about it. It was a movie. Like, yeah, okay, I get it. But... No, like, everything worked perfectly for him.
Yeah. If you're yelling it's a movie, it was in the script at this podcast, you're listening to the wrong podcast. We understand it's a movie, but we're just doing silliness, fan theories. We're nerds. This is what nerds do.
Yeah.
If you don't understand that, then you're probably listening to the wrong podcast.
Right. But so speaking of the topic at large here, the Clone Wars.
Yes.
I am a rather large fan of the the newer version of the Clone Wars.
Okay.
And I really got into it. At first, the first few episodes, I was like, oh. This CGI animation stuff just really isn't for me. But then I started watching it for the story itself and kind of tying it into what we were just talking about with Palpatine. So I'm watching it, and you've got the senator who's talking to Anakin and Obi-Wan and the rest of the Jedi, and he's playing it off so cool, like, oh my gosh, I didn't expect that to happen. But sometimes it almost seems like a wrench did get thrown in his plan, and now he's got to come up with something new.
Yeah, I did like how in certain episodes something would come up that could undermine, and then you saw just how manipulative and just how, like, I remember there was an episode in, it was one of the Lost, when they brought in episode, the 6th season, not the season that's going to be coming up soon, but the 6th season, and they did an episode where Order 66 gets uncovered. One of the clones gets the order activated early, and you find out about the chips, that were implanted in the back of this in their skull, and how he played that off. Like, yes, we understand it's there, but we needed to control them. We need it so they don't go off, because the initial clone that we based it off of was so violent and so that we needed something to curb those feelings, impulses, and the Jedi just like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, why not?
For as powerful as the Jedi were, they were awful naive.
And they knew, they had all these, and we know now that they had all these pre-programmed orders. And it seems like to me like they were somewhat public, at least knowledgeable to a lot of people. And so you wonder, did the Jedi know that there was an Order 66? And they're just like, yeah, sure, if we get out of hand, sure, we won't need it, but yeah, sure, it's there. Because they had to know they knew about Order 65, which was the and I do know what Order 65 was.
That's not ringing a bell for me.
Order 65 was basically the opposite of Order 66. Order 65 was that if the Senate felt, or the Jedi or the Senate felt, that the Supreme Chancellor was overstepping his bounds, they could order Order 65, which would then the guards and the clone soldiers would then take into custody the Chancellor.
Ah.
So it was basically the opposite of Order 66. It was, instead of taking out the Jedi, it was basically taking the Chancellor out and arresting the Chancellor, or if need be, eliminating the Chancellor. So he even put that in there just to say, like, see, I'm playing under democratic rules. If something happens, and I, well, I kind of wink, nudge.
Yeah, I wonder if that's kind of how he was able to get away with that. But you got the Jedi. They're like, oh, look, somebody cloned this army based off of this bounty hunter who not only is just a bounty hunter, he's wearing Mandalorian armor. And they're like,
yeah,
well, what's the worst that could happen? Let's use them.
Yeah, why not? Off of a Jedi who had been lost in for years, and no one knew what happened to him. Sifo Dyas, and nobody knew. Nobody knew where he went and how he
or where he got the funding to do it, or no, they're just like, whatever, let's roll with it.
Yeah, we have an army now. It's cool. Yeah, why not?
Well, we need to fight the droids somehow, even though you watch the Clone Wars and Yoda destroys an entire battalion of droids all by himself. But let's just get a whole bunch of clones to throw at him. That'll be fun.
Yeah. So
it's okay if millions of clones die. They're all the same guy, so
they're the same guy. Yeah. And that was one thing I did. That is one thing I did appreciate that the Clone Wars did, was the series at least is they had several episodes where you ended up caring about the clones.
Oh yeah.
You ended up caring about these people and even giving them, nicknames and names.
Right.
Rex, Cody, Fives, all these um, different characters. You learn that yeah, they're clones, but they're still individuals.
Right. Like
They
I kind of wonder if that, in universe. I'm not talking about what they did with the script and stuff, but in universe, that just goes to show that even if you are cloned, and let's say somebody were to clone me, yeah. I'm the same guy, and I start off with the exact same interests and things like that, but my clone might pursue a different interest more so than I would, and my clone might diverge from that, to a sub hobby, let's say, into more and more and eventually they just become their own person, their own identity.
Oh yeah. Well, it goes back to the whole thing, nature versus nurture, and how you were raised and what you were. I mean, obviously, with these clones, they were raised from the time they were babies to do one thing and one thing only, and that's to be a soldier.
Right.
But then you break it down into, this clone is raised to be a soldier, but then they go into a specialized field of demolition. They're a demolition clone. Or this one goes into a specialty field of being a sniper. This one goes into being a pilot. This one goes, these different aspects. They're still the same person, but they have different fields that they go into, and then even just different personalities.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
I think they made a comment about that in one of the episodes. I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember it exactly, but they were doing if I remember correctly, it was kind of like a morale speech, and they said, we all might wear the same face, but we all are our own people.
Yeah.
And you really do get a sense of that as the show kind of progresses.
Oh, definitely. And I also there were several episodes, and it was one of those things where they took a line from the crawl and expanded on it. It was in the crawl for episode 3, it mentions there were heroes on both sides. And I do like that there were several episodes where they looked at the war from the Separatist side.
Yes.
That they looked at it from that point. Not just the droids and not just the machinations of Palpatine and Dooku, but they showed the Separatist Council, and they showed that not everyone, and it's easy, especially with any war even today, that war is not always black and white. And I think we've been, especially in America, we've been conditioned so much to see it with war, especially, and I think with the last 2 major wars, with looking at especially the Second World War, it was easy to see who the good guys were and who the bad guys were. Nazis bad. I think everyone except for maybe, actual real life Nazis could attest that Nazis are bad and were bad. But you go back to, like we said, World War One. It gets a little more muddled. You go back even further in other wars, who the good guys were and who the bad guys were gets very, very muddled. And this is another case where you can look at that and see that there are so many shades of gray. And just because you think you're on the right side, the other side thinks there is just as much that they're on the right side.
Right.
So I thought that was, I did like that they showed the other point of view.
Yeah, and that definitely, that helped enhance the story a lot, I think. And
that there were friends of people on the other side.
Right. Yeah, it
They had
reminded me a lot of like the Civil War, where you
it
would have
was
even families that were divided.
yeah yeah, and I mean there's an episode where you find out that Padme had a friend or an acquaintance or I think it may have been a former lover. I think they kind of hint at that was on the Separatist Council.
Right.
And you find, I think even Ahsoka finds a friend, and finds there's someone um, on that other side, which leads me, you talking about being like the Civil War, and you could almost say, and we can talk about this for a little bit. Do you think that you can almost say that the what would become the Galactic Civil War was basically just a continuation of the Clone Wars?
I really think it was.
I mean, yeah, it was just there was just a pause, and then it started up again.
Right. And you know, I think in a universe like the Star Wars universe, it's conflict is kind of at the root of everything. I feel like.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
the whole universe itself seems kind of geared towards that. Um,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
so
So,
right, like
yeah.
the whole thing with Palpatine. You really got to think how far back did he come up with this idea?
Yeah. And I mean, and how was it one of those things that like he had an overall idea for how he wanted to do it, and then he would just make changes to the plan as he went, or was this every beat for beat planned out beat for beat as it went, or was it one of those things of he wanted to come to power and he saw, initially he saw the situation on Naboo that was going on with Naboo and the Trade Federation, and just like, this is something I can use. Let's see where this takes me. And then as that going on, he saw that there was cracks within the Republic and that there were groups that wanted to separate, and he's like, I can use this. Or was it everything planned out? It's like, okay, I'm going to use this, I'm going to do this is going to happen, like this, and this, and then I'll become emperor. Or was it just
right.
a series of unfortunate events?
Right. Yeah, that
Type of
worked.
thing.
That worked
And
in his favor.
yeah,
Well,
that he just happened to, like, he'd see something happening and he would just push it along a little bit to get it to go where he wanted it to go. And then he was like, okay, I see where that's going now. I'll hook on to this. I'll hook on with this and, move it along this way.
right.
Because I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think that he definitely. I definitely think he was kind of playing it by ear, but I do think that he may have even been able to see a little bit into the future, kind of like
Yeah.
Master Yoda. And by using that ability, the force sight, or precognition or whatever you want to call it, he was able to kind of guide the pawns into the positions that he wanted them.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, you also got to give it up that he was definitely playing both sides during
Right.
this. He was
Right.
he was at one point, at one point not only, yes, the Chancellor of the Republic, but he was also Darth Sidious
Right.
and was behind, Dooku and Maul and all these different different things, and so he was playing, which begs the question for me is, yes, we know that Dooku knew who Palpatine was. Who else knew?
Well,
Who else?
I mean, did Dooku actually know that he was Palpatine, or
I think he
only
did.
know him as Sidious?
I think he did know. Because I think there's indications not only in the movies but in the Clone Wars that he knew, what was going on.
Yeah,
And because
yeah, that's true.
because he even in episode 2 he said a Sith Lord controls the Senate.
This is true. He does say that.
He does, yes. So I think he knew what was going on at that time, and
well, when you think about like we had that scene where basically Sidious said, "No, everything has happened because I allowed it to happen." And when I first saw that movie and I first heard that line, I thought, "Oh, he's just being a pompous villain like they usually are." But he actually, the more I thought about it, and of course, when they did episodes 1, 2, and 3, they obviously kind of tailored it so that 4, 5, and 6 would make more sense, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But even still, you go back and you watch those, you're like, man, this guy really did, have things in order where they needed to be.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, he was definitely, he puts the genius and evil genius. At least as far as, the political side of it, and getting everything too, because that's basically for Palpatine. That's all the Clone Wars was, a way for him to gain ultimate power.
right, which that's what he wanted, and I'm pretty sure that he's the one who paid to have that army built. He knew that the Jedi would use it.
Mm-hmm.
He knew he had it all planned out. This guy had it all figured out.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah.
we've been talking a lot about Palpatine.
We have, well, I mean, he's such a key figure of the Clone Wars. I mean, he is ultimately the reason for the war.
Right.
I mean, he's the linchpin. He's the key.
Yeah. But
He's
kind of going back to the Clone War in and of itself and talking about the clones, how do you feel about the clones? Are they just, do you personally feel that they're just numbers, or do you feel like they should have been treated with more respect, or do you think the Jedi used them appropriately?
I definitely think that they needed to be. I mean, if we're talking in universe, definitely more respect and more, and I think that's why Anakin was so respected by the clones, because he treated them like individuals, and we even get a little bit of that with the 501st with Vader. He still treats them with some semblance of respect.
I agree with that.
But I think not every Jedi did that, obviously, because some just saw them as flesh droids.
Right. I think that's how they were supposed to be taken in the very beginning, when we first find out Obi-Wan's walking through the Camino station there, and he sees them all being bred and trained, and I think that's what we were supposed to feel like. I don't think they actually intended on people getting attached to the clones.
Yeah, yeah. I think it was whenever. It definitely was the Clone Wars TV series that helped with that. But even episode 3, when you find out that he said when he called Commander Cody, and you find out, oh, they have names. It's not just Clone One, Clone Two. It's different names, which makes sense that you would give names to them so you could differentiate between Clone 1525000 is not as easy on the doesn't roll off the tongue as well as Commander Cody or Rex or
Right.
you know
Which it was always nice to hear them give themselves nicknames and become individuals. I personally,
which
I got
which is
really
very
attached to the clones.
yeah, and it's very very militaristic too.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, I was never in the army, but my dad was, and I have my nephew is in the army, so I've a nephew and a cousin who are in the army, and that's very especially if you're in combat, to give yourself nicknames and different little names for each other and stuff like that. So yeah, that makes very very much sense too that they
Right.
would do that.
Absolutely. I mean, I was in the Air Force for 14 years, and I worked on airplanes, and all of the pilots, they all had their little call signs, which was essentially their nickname, which is
Yeah,
very similar to how the clones kind of did their thing. You can't pick your own; the other clones give it to you.
yeah,
Not calling pilots in the Air Force clones, but you know what I mean. Yeah,
yeah,
they all communally gave the pilot their nickname. So yeah, you're
yeah,
right. You're absolutely right. That is a very militant thing to do. Because we do. We all have the same haircut. We all have the same uniform. We all look alike. We're meant to look alike. And
yeah,
so to have that nickname does it gives you a sense of individuality. So
yeah.
I definitely grew to really respect a lot of the clones, but you also kind of see they really are their own people in that you had some of them that didn't want to be part of the war anymore.
No, yeah, you had some that left and went out on their own and decided to, just live their life. And you get that sense of betrayal from, the clones of, that sense of brotherhood. And if you leave that brotherhood, there is that sense of abandonment and,
Right,
you betrayed us, it doesn't matter if you agree with it or not, this is what you do, this is your job.
right.
And
Well,
until the job is done,
yeah, it was.
it goes,
It does, and it kind of seemed like at some points they kind of used that clone mentality to their own advantage, so to speak, because they
yeah,
would at one moment they're oh no, we're different, we may look the same but we're different and we have our own personalities and our own likes and our own dislikes, blah blah blah. But then the instant that they want to do something like that, where some of them don't want to fight and they want to live a normal life, they immediately, oh no, this is what we were born to do. We were all bred to be this way. You can't go
yeah.
do something else. Like all of a sudden, no, we can't be individuals. We're all clones.
Well, and you could also make the other argument of, like with any soldier, you know, if you leave and you go AWOL and you quit, you quit or you go, you decide, I'm done with this. I'm not going to do this again. I'm leaving, you know, then you could make, you could, if it's a clone, you could make the argument of, what about all your brothers and sisters, your brothers who are, as far as I know, there are no female clones, but all your brothers who stayed behind and have died, who have lost their lives, what about them? You're just because you were, quote unquote, you know, um, decided you didn't like this and you want to go out on your own, you were being selfish, and we're still here fighting the fight while you're, quote, trying to raise a family and start, a life on your own, which is great, but you have all your brothers and sisters, all your brothers here who are giving their lives and spilling their blood while you're here sipping tea, hiding out.
Right.
You know,
But that's very true.
it's just so.
Okay, so
Yeah,
I have one last question for you before we wrap up here.
okay.
Because you just brought up a very interesting point. So this is not just for you. This is for everybody out there to kind of think about and just kind of get your brain juices flowing on this in a fan theory kind of way. So let's say that instead of Jango Fett being the originator of the clones,
Okay.
and they went with female clones, who do you think would make the best candidate to draw from?
That's hard because and as much as I hate to say it, there's not a lot of, like, we have a few female bounty hunters that we are mentioned and we get mention of, or saying, and Sam Weasel, I think that's the pronounced the name, the changeling, the shapeshifter.
Right.
But other than that, there's not a lot of female. So, like, the first name I went to, but she would have been too young during this time period, would have been Mara Jade. But she would have been too young,
right?
Because she was close to Luke's age, so she would have been born either. I think she was a little bit older than Luke, but not by much. So she would have been just a child at the end of the Clone Wars. She would have been maybe at the latest 5 when the Clone Wars ended.
Right.
I think there's like a 5-year difference between her and Luke. But yeah, I don't. That's a hard one because they almost have to make up a character, which is what they did with Jango.
True.
They had Boba, so they're like, well, Boba needs a dad, so we'll just make this Jango character. So I don't know. That's a hard one. You almost have to make up a character to do that.
Okay, I can buy that. I can buy that for $1. Maybe our listeners can find a way to contact us with their thoughts on it.
Definitely
put it on our YouTube video, or possibly join the page and kind of throw their ideas out there. Maybe I'm gonna start doing that. I feel like I'm gonna kind of throw out a crazy random idea for everybody to think about, just to kind of get your mind going a little bit before you go to bed.
There you go. Yeah.
So
alrighty then. Well, we will wrap things up here for this week's episode of War of the Stars, a Star Wars podcast. As always, you can check us out wherever podcasts are heard. Anchor.fm. If you want to support the channel, you can do that several ways. Obviously, we have a Patreon page, patreon.com/Realm of the Mist Entertainment. If you don't like that, if you're not a big fan of Patreon, I know there's been a lot of political stuff dealing with Patreon. Not a lot of people like that. We do have another way. If you check us out on Anchor.fm, you can not only listen to all the shows here on Realm of the Mist, but there's a little tab down at the bottom called support. You click that and you can give us support that way. I understand though, if money is tight with a lot of us, we just appreciate any time you listen to the show. Every listener we get is really, really cool, and it's always cool to see new people listening to the show and seeing those numbers rise. And whether it's one person listening to the show or 12 or however many each week, we appreciate every person who listens to the show.
Absolutely.
You can check us out, like I said, wherever podcasts are heard. Anchor.fm, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, you name it, we're on it. You can find me of course, on Twitter at JohnMarkTolly1, because I'm, of course, the #1 John Mark Tolley on Twitter. Facebook at Mark Tolley. Check us out at the Facebook page at War of the Stars, and of course the Realm of the Mist podcast. And Ray, where can they find you at?
I can be found on Chronicles of the Lost Realm, both on Facebook and Instagram under those names. Just plop it into the search bar and you'll find it pretty quick. We run a show, gets posted up on YouTube. We post it to the page, so like and subscribe for notifications. And you find me right here on War of the Stars with my pilot here, Mark Tolley.
That's right. And by the way, also, if you go to the Realm of the Mist webpage, we have War of the Stars t-shirts. We've had them for a while. They're made to order. You can check them out. $25 for domestic, $35 for international. I believe I'd have to look again, but I believe that's the prices we set down. But they are made to order right now. Just send us in any information. Email us, Realm of the Mist Entertainment at gmail.com or John Tolley 3930. Or if you want to get me in touch with me through Twitter or any other, just give me your size and your how to get a hold of you, and we will get those shirts out for you as soon as possible.
All right, sounds great.
So until next week, remember, this is not just my Star Wars. This is not just your Star Wars. This is our Star Wars. Until next time, may the Force be with you.